Hi, Jack Walsh, MBA's Dr. Lou here doing a special request webinar on the power of Microsoft Excel. Over the last couple of terms, I've had a number of students come to me from point A on the spectrum to point Z on the spectrum. On one hand saying, hey, I'm uncomfortable with some of the financial management topics within FM2, and can you give me some tips and tricks on how I can get better at Excel in order to become better in my financial analysis skills? And then I've had advanced users come to me and say, geez, I'd really like to take a look at a discounted cash flow model. Can you give me an example of one or two of them? And so thus spawned this learning course here to just share with everybody what I think are some of the most commonly used formulas within Excel that you should be exposed to, as well as providing a framework that you can apply to create a learning path or a learning journal for yourself for the future in order to boil the ocean into a sea and take steps, methodical steps to learn more and more about this really, really powerful tool. And then also at the end of this presentation, I will provide a discounted cash flow model for those students who have requested those as well. So let's jump into this and let's hit this agenda first. So in the agenda today, what I'd like to do is just talk a little bit about the value of the Excel tool. Share with you a framework for learning and optimizing your time. This comes from an external consultancy. And then talk about 5 key categories of how I have organized some of the most commonly used functions within Excel to help better think and prioritize the usefulness of some of these features. Those categories are speed strokes on the keyboard, some basic functions like mathematical functions within Excel, some more advanced functions. So these are the same mathematical functions, but you can apply criterion to their calculations. Then key highlights or key features. So these are really, really advanced features within Excel. Features like index match, charts and graphs, goal seek, pivot tables, and the like. That's really going to be beyond the value, or beyond this particular webinar. But I do want to give you some exposure to it, so you can put that on your learning journal and say, oh, I want to set aside some time later on and go back and do this. There's a ton of great free resources out there that you can go back to afterwards and get involved in. And then lastly, there's some finance geek stuff, right? There's some great financial formulas, and I'll give you some exposure to that, and that'll also manifest itself within the discounted cash flow model that I'll show at the end here. So after we go through that, then I'm going to pop over to Excel and I'm going to do the ESPN highlight 30-second snippets and try to go through 8 or 10 of these key functions and just show you, one person's perspective on how to use some of these functions within an Excel example. And then I'll leave you with some future resources and additional training resources, again, so you can continue your learning journey with Excel. So the value of the Excel tool, right? We know today that knowledge workers spend about 30 minutes a day using a spreadsheet. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's Microsoft spreadsheet. It could be a simple pencil and paper spreadsheet that you use to, categorize or organize your work, right? It could be a spreadsheet that you use to jot down perhaps an app on your mobile phone to just jot down your spending habits. It could be, it could be a different spreadsheet used to sort of manage inventory, right? If you're an operations manager or whatnot. So there's a variety of different tasks that can be used beyond just the finance skill set to make use of a spreadsheet. The example I'm going to pull up in a few minutes here is on sports statistics, because I'm a huge football fan, and I'm going to show you some sports statistics to analyze some of that stuff. We also know that 1 billion people use Microsoft spreadsheet programs. It's a lot of people. And about 80% of global corporations use Excel as well. So there's a lot of mass scale, a lot of people that are making use of this particular tool. It's got to be valuable, right? And then the functionality of Excel is extremely robust with over 500 functions. So that statistic alone is a little bit mind-numbing. And you're looking at that saying, oh my goodness, this is an ocean. Where do I even start, right? And that's really the goal of this particular webinar. So I'm going to give you a framework so you can think about where can I at least start, get testing the waters and get my feet wet in this. So page 4 talks about a framework for trying to prioritize this ocean. okay? There are two axes to this framework, and this framework is adapted. It came from a consultancy called Analysis by Filter, and I've amended it slightly. But on the y-axis, you have time to learn, right? So if you're on the bottom of this axis, it does not take a whole lot of time to learn the function. And if you're on the top, it's going to take a little bit more time to learn that. And then on the x-axis, you have the usefulness of the functionality within Excel. So if you're on the left, it's not that useful, but if you're on the right, there's a lot of value to it. It's very, very useful. So obviously, functions that don't take a whole lot of time to work, that are very, very valuable and useful, you got to do it now. And that's what I'm going to focus on for the remainder of this particular webinar. But there's other archetypes you can read within these other quadrants, but I'm going to focus down here on this bottom right. So I've taken the top few dozen Excel features of the 500, and I've just plotted them. I've categorized them into those key categories: speed strokes and basic functions and more advanced functions and key features and finance geek stuff. And then I've plotted them on this scatter plot according to the analysis by filtered prioritization matrix. And again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus our time when I flip over to Excel on this bottom right quadrant. Before I show you what those functions are, let's go through each of these categories. So what do I mean by speed keystrokes? So speed keystrokes, we have keystrokes that you can actually use on your keyboard that perform functions that would typically be supported within Microsoft icons. So Control X means to cut, and Control C means to copy, Control V means to paste, so on and so forth. And so I'll evidence this when I go into Excel, and you'll see how fast the speed keystrokes can make you so much more productive. But this is a great tear sheet that you can have, again, to just go and explore some of these keystrokes. The next category are basic functions. So these are the green dots. And these are typical descriptive statistics and other formatting functions. So you've got, typical ones you're probably fairly familiar with: sum, average, the minimum number within a given range that you choose, the maximum, count and count A. Count typically counts numbers, and count A typically counts cells with characters in them. Concatenate, combine cells into one, and so on and so forth. So, I've put a few of these down here with some descriptions and some example formulas. Again, more serving as a template for you to use this as a tear sheet and go out and explore on your own for the ones that I don't get to in the Excel example. The next set are more advanced functions. So these are oftentimes the basic functions, but there's an additional criterion or additional spin that's put on some of these functions. So SUMIF is summing a range of cells, but only if those cells meet certain criterion. And so I'll show you an example of that shortly here. And then, VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP, folks have probably heard about that. These are very, very powerful functions that allow you to look up within an array or a table the leftmost column in a spreadsheet and then go grab something else within that array in order to make a data set a little bit more consumable. And I'll show a couple examples of that as well in a little bit. Fancy features. All right, so these are beyond the scope of this webinar, but these are extremely powerful functions in Excel. And I do recommend that everybody set aside some time on their own to go and explore these ones in particular that I put onto this chart. I will give a sneak preview into pivot tables and goal seek in a little bit, but these are really, really powerful. And again, I think you probably need about 30 to 60 minutes on a YouTube video or just a learning session just to learn some of these. And then here's our finance geek stuff, some financial specific functions, XNPV, IRR, payment, and slope. These are some great finance functions that you can use in different ways as well from a financial analysis perspective. And many of these will be seen in the discount cash flow model that I'll show at the end of this video recording. All right, so what are the functions that I'm going to go through here real quick? Again, I'm focusing on the bottom right, the gotta do it now block. And these are a list along with their categories that I'm going to go through. So I'm going to pull this legend up in Excel. And give me a second here to stop sharing this, and I will share this Excel document. All right, as I mentioned, This Excel document, just to ground everybody on it, it is a bunch of football statistics. It is actually quarterback statistics from the 2017 NFL season from last year, and it lists the quarterback, whether they're in the AFC or the NFC division, the NFL team they play for, the number of plays that they encountered within the number of games that they played in that season. These are fantasy points, plays per game, number of running plays, the number of rushing yards, so on and so forth. Okay, and so I'm just going to use this just as a data set to make use of to evidence some of these functions here. So just as an example, let's suppose that Tom Brady was listed here as a NFC player. And I know that that's not true because Tom Brady plays for the Patriots and the Patriots are in the AFC. So to fix that particular cell in this data set, what I might first do, what I would typically do in Excel, is I'd come up here to home and I'd say I'm going to cut that cell out of there and maybe I'll just paste it over here for the time being. And then what I need to do is I need to come into this cell and I need to type in AFC to correct that data, right? So that took me probably 5 or 6 seconds to do. But if I was using speed keystrokes, right, I could just come down here to AFC and go Control-C, which copies that cell, and then I just go over here and go do Control-V, which would paste it right over there. In less than 1 second, I've been able to just fix that data set by using some speed keystrokes. And again, as I mentioned, Control-X is cut, Control-C is copy, and Control-V is paste. And so you'll be, as I continue to do examples of these formulas, I'll use those speed keystrokes and you'll see that it makes you much more efficient and productive as you're using a spreadsheet. All right, so let's get into some of these green dots, which are the basic functions. So sum, right? Sum's pretty straightforward. What I want to do is I'm just going to take the first 5 quarterbacks, so to say, and I just want to sum up and add the total plays that they had in the 2017 year. So what I could do is I could highlight these 5 cells, and Excel on the bottom has some descriptive statistics, so it actually will tell you what the sum is. So you can see that together those 5 quarterbacks participated in a little over 3,000 plays. But just because I want to trust but verify, I'm going to go ahead and type in sum, and then I'm going to point out those 5 cells, close the parentheses, and there is the 3068 that you saw down below before. So just a quick way to do, to use the sum function. You also don't necessarily need to use a full set that's together like this when you use the sum function. If I wanted to just do sum and I wanted to choose a few of these quarterbacks, I could choose a cell and then do comma and then choose a cell and then choose another cell like that, and it would just sum up those 3 that I chose there. So that's another really effective way to use the sum function. Okay. Average works very similarly. So I'm going to use the same function, but instead of having sum here, I'm going to average. So I'll type in average. And again, it will average the number of plays that those 5 quarterbacks did. And on average, between these 5 guys, they played 614 plays in the 2017 year. And then again, same thing, right? You can see the average down here on the bottom as well for what I've highlighted. Okay. Count and count A, again, same concept. If I wanted to count the number of numbers that were in a set of cells, I could use count. If I wanted to count the number of characters or text, I would use count A and then choose arrange in a similar fashion. This next one's one of my favorites, and not a whole lot of people know about it, but it's just a really simple function that I use in headers and footers on spreadsheets. It's just the now function. You can type in equals now and then open parentheses, close parentheses, and what it does is it time and date stamps your spreadsheet. So anytime you're working in your spreadsheet, if you printed it, it would tell you the time and date that you last worked on it and that you had last updated it. So it's just a great organization and tracking tool that you can make use of in Excel for using headers or footers on your spreadsheets. So those are a few basic functions. Let's head now into the stars, some more advanced functions, and we'll use SUMIF. So SUMIF, what it's going to do is we're going to make use of it to sum up the number of plays that a set of quarterbacks made use of, but we're going to set a criteria to it. We're going to look at only quarterbacks that were playing in the NFC conference and the AFC conference. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, equals SUMIF. I want to sum all the plays for any quarterback, and I'll just maybe choose quarterbacks that played in 10 or more games. Right, so any quarterback within this domain here, and if that domain is NFC, then I want you to sum the play column. So you see how I put a range around this. And what I'm doing here as well is I'm doing what's called anchoring the cells. I'm pressing F4, which puts $ behind these cell ranges. And that way, if I choose to copy, C, and paste these ranges later on in other formulas that I'm doing, these will remain anchored. So these will not move on me. And so you can see that for quarterbacks that played more than 10 games in last year's season, they combined for a total number of plays of around 7,700 plays. I could do the same thing for AFC quarterbacks. So what I'm going to do is here is I'm going to copy this formula. I'm going to do Control-C. I'm going to do Control-V and paste that into the AFC line item. I'm going to drag this criteria down. So now, again, I'm taking quarterbacks with more than 10 games that they played. I'm just setting an AFC criterion in this column, and I'm telling them to add these plays if the quarterback plays in the AFC. And you can see that those quarterbacks played more plays than the NFC quarterbacks within that domain of quarterbacks. So again, just a really effective way to summarize data using a more advanced formula that has a criterion associated with it. We could do the same thing if we wanted using the COUNTIF function. Again, it works the exact same way. I'm not going to do that example because it's very similar. And then let's look into VLOOKUP. This is a really powerful feature within Excel. And what I'm going to do here this time is I'm going to create what's called a validation list. So here we have this huge data set, and it's not consumable. There's just too much there. What I want to do is the Pittsburgh Steelers play the Cleveland Browns in 2 weeks. And so what I want to do is I want to compare these two quarterbacks. I want to compare Ben Roethlisberger and Tyrod Taylor. He played for the Bills last year, but we think that he's going to probably start for the Browns in week 1. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go over here to data, and I'm going to choose this data validation. This is a really neat trick you can do in Excel. I'm going to choose data validation. I'm going to create a list. And I'm going to set that list up, and I'm going to list all these quarterbacks. So these quarterbacks are now going to show up in a really cool drop-down list. So I can actually create a template if I wanted to. And I can, do like a drop-down list. And I'm going to choose Ben Roethlisberger. And then in this one, I'm going to choose Tyrod Taylor. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create almost like a balanced scorecard for each of these two quarterbacks. I want to know the number of games that they played last year. I want to know the plays per game. And I want to know their interceptions. Okay. So again, you can start to see the analogy of this example to some of the content we had in financial management too. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to type in VLOOKUP. And I want to look up Ben Roethlisberger. And I'm going to look him up in this array of quarterbacks. And I'm going to go the whole way over to here. And again, I'm going to anchor that array. And because I want in this column number of games, I need to tell it which column I want it to pull. So within this array, this is column 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, is the games played, and 8 is the plays per game. So I'm going to type in 7 here. And it told me that Ben played in 15 games, which is true, right? We can see that there. Then I'm going to copy this down and do the same thing for Tyrod Taylor. Tyrod Taylor also played in 15 games, you can see here. And then I'm going to copy these over, and I'm going to do plays per game, except this time we got to change the column heading to column heading 8, right? Because plays per game shows up in the 8th column within this particular array. And so again, we see that Ben had an average plays per game of 39.3. And again, we can see that right here. And then the last one was interceptions. And I think interceptions is all on the far right-hand side here. It's the last column within the array. So we'll just type that in there too. So what is that? 8 is 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 perhaps. So we'll just type in 17. Those are total interceptions within the full year there, right? And then Tyrod Taylor, we'll just copy these down. And there you see Tyrod statistics. So there I have a nice balanced scorecard or stat sheet for each of these quarterbacks. And so I can kind of compare the matchup here that's going to occur in week 1 when the Steelers play the Browns. And so they played about the same number of games, but Ben plays more plays per game, and he throws more interceptions than Tyrod. So again, I can start my analysis on who I think is going to be the better quarterback here in week 1. But a great use of the VLOOKUP function within Excel. All right, so now let's jump to the highlights, the really fancy features here, pivot tables and goal seek. Again, I'm just going to expose you to these, but you really need to spend a good half an hour, spend a little bit more time digging into this stuff. But a pivot table is again a table that allows you to make sense and bring more meaning to very large data sets. So it allows you to take tables and then truncate it using certain criteria or conditions. And so what you typically do is you'd go over here to pivot table, within it the insert menu. I'm going to type in pivot table, and it asks you to select the table range here. It's already highlighted a given table range. I'm going to press OK, and then what it does is it pulls up for you kind of like a drag and drop feature down here. So what I can do is I can drag and drop and say, okay, I want to first see, AFC and NFC, and now I want to look at, games played perhaps. How many games played occurred within the AFC and the NFC last year? Or, maybe I want to add in some of these other particular features. And so these are just really nice drag and drop features that you can pop in here and just cut data in multiple different ways based on what you're seeing. So again, my intent is just to expose you to some of these features. Again, I think bringing a data set that means something to you will really help you learn this. And then going out to maybe a YouTube and just typing in or Googling pivot tables and making use of that will really help you. And then the last feature here that's really valuable is something called goal seek. And what goal seek does is it helps you to solve a formula, basically. So let's just take an example. Again, we'll use Ben Roethlisberger as an example. So we said that Ben, played in 15 games. So his games played were 15, and his average plays per game was 39.3. So if I multiplied those together, I would get his total plays played. And so, but again, that was for last year. So if I go to goal seek, what I might want to say is, well, geez, how many plays per game would he have to have if his total plays were, say, 650? Right? Maybe 650 is the total number of plays that I think he really needs to have within a year in order to be successful. So if I'm doing the math and I'm calling the plays and I'm the offensive coordinator, how many plays per game do I need to make sure that Ben plays in, right? So what you can do here is go over to data and choose the what if analysis, sensitivity analysis, and choose goal seek. And it says set cell. So I want to set this cell to 600 by changing this cell, because this is the variable that I want to solve for. I want to know how many plays per game does Ben have to have. Now if I click OK, what did I do wrong here? Let's see. Okay, let me try this again here. So here I have an input cell, here I have an input cell, and this is the calculation of those cells. So I'm going to go to data, goal seek, and I'm going to set this cell to, again, I believe that Ben needs to play 650 plays to be successful in the year. And I want to know how many plays, average plays per game does he need to hit in order to make that number. So I want to change this particular cell. If I click OK, it's going to spit out and show me that this number needs to be much higher than the 39.3. And there it goes. It went up to 43.3. So it can be very effective at just, being a sensitivity tool that allows you to automatically calculate and back solve for a given solution that you're looking for. So again, a very powerful tool, and you can use this. This is very, very valuable tool that can be used in sensitivity analysis when you're running different scenarios within a financial model or whatnot. All right, the last function is the IRR, right? The internal rate of return function. And so in this Excel workbook, I have included 3 red tabs. This is an example of the infamous discounted cash flow model that many students have asked me for. And again, this is set up as a template, so you can make use of this, sort of play around with it, get acclimated to it, and almost create a template of your own. But this template is set up so that the first page is set up where you can, if you're undertaking an investment, you can put in a description of that investment, where did it originate from? Here I just have a location name. You can categorize the investment into a certain type of project type. So again, here you see the evidence of the data validation drop-down box that I explained before. And then you can put a project start and an end date as well around that. Then there's some places here where you can enter capital investment amounts, depending upon the type of investment that's being put out there. And then you have the P&L, the profit and loss category. So this investment will bring about a future cash stream. It'll bring about cost savings, or it'll bring about additional revenues, where it will generate cost savings or whatnot. And so you can put those inflows and those outflows within this particular schedule. This is also set up where you can set a given time period, and then the out periods dynamically change based upon that input period that you provide. So it's set up so that the first page is that input category. And again, I've used a $200,000 capital investment example in here that generates sort of a choppy savings stream. It generates about $30,000 in savings each quarter, but there's maintenance dollars that need to be spent within this particular investment, basically every 4 quarters or each year. So page 2 is then a summary of this input sheet. And so what it does is it just nicely summarizes the investment period. So by quarter, it shows you, well, in period 0, we put out a $200,000 capital investment. And there was also some operating cash flows, some investment that was needed as well. So this is capital and this is operating, which resulted in a free cash flow deficit of $255,000. So I have to spend money in order to make money, right? So I spent $255,000, but look at the cash out that I'm going to get each quarter as a result of making this particular investment. So this is basically your cash flow stream that results from the particular model that has been set up. And off of this cash flow stream, what this model does is it then runs 4 key assessment metrics for that investment. The IRR, the internal rate of return. The internal rate of return is basically the discount rate at which you would need to discount a stream of cash flows in order to make the net present value of it 0. And that rate is typically compared to what's called a hurdle rate. Hurdle rate is the minimum rate that an investment would need to achieve in order to justify its viability to being made. Otherwise, if you can't get over that hurdle rate, you're better off just not spending the cash and using the cash as is within the current operations of the business. The net present value. So the net present value is calculated at a given weighted average cost of capital. And it shows you whether there is value to making that particular investment. In this example, it's saying that, the net present value is about $23,000. So there's some value to that. And then there's the discounted payback period and an undiscounted payback period. So again, in the example we used, we can just eyeball this and get a general sense of the undiscounted payback, right? In order to recoup $255,000, let's just go ahead and add this. And again, let's use our descriptive statistics at the bottom. How many cells or quarters do we need in order to get to 255? Looks like 13 quarters, between 13 and 14 quarters, right? So if I took 13 or 14 quarters and divided it by 4, it's about 3.25 or 3.5 years, and that's exactly what you're seeing here in terms of the undiscounted payback period. So these are 3 great statistics that, using some of the formulas that are shown in this discounted cash flow model in Excel, you can use to do an assessment of a particular investment opportunity. IRR, you click on these formulas and you can trace the formulas. So all the calculations, this is pretty intense here, but all the calculations are in this back spreadsheet. You can toy around with this and see how the formulas have basically been added. But down here at the bottom is where you can see the calculations have been run. So there's your IRR formula within Excel, and you can see how that is basically being calculated. So it's running an internal rate of return on this cash flow stream, and it is generating a 17% IRR. That is above the 13% hurdle rate. So in this example, this is a viable investment where the reward outweighs the risk, and the organization should consider making this. In the absence of an opportunity cost that isn't higher than this. So hopefully this has been helpful. And again, these are resources that you can use to get a little bit more acclimated with Excel, as well as a fairly advanced discounted cash flow model. I hope you've enjoyed them. And let me just flip back and close this thing out here. I will stop this share and I'll go back to our PowerPoint and just leave you with a page of resources. These are free training resources here that you can reach out to, as well as some training sources that you can pay for. A lot of these are massive open online courses where you can pay for Excel courses to get some training. And then there's just some great resources on the web, some tutorial PDFs, as well as the work function within Microsoft, where you can get a lot of these resources as well. There's my contact information. Feel free to reach out as well if you've got some questions on this webinar or just other Excel questions. I'd be happy to help. And I hope you enjoy.